Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy so that you can go on about your day, maybe even feeling a little bit more relieved about things. So civil rights has become a buzzword over the last few months, and certainly as the riots and protests continue along with defund the police. Now, I have said in the past, I've applied to be on some of these civilian police review boards, not because I think they need to exist, but if they're going to, I'd like to have minds like mine, or in our case, our next guests on them. He is J. Christian Adams. He is the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation and was just appointed by President Trump to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And we can debate whether or not that's what Congress was for in the first place or not, but as long as it's going to exist, I'm really relieved that folks like J. Christian Adams are on the board there. Chris, welcome back to the program. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
And congratulations for this. It sounds like, one of those don't congratulate me yet. Wait till you see what the work is going to be. But it's heartening to know that there are minds like yours involved in this process, because too easily it seems like it is the low-hanging fruit of partisan pandering that dominates this maelstrom right now. Take us into what your thoughts are as you head into this undertaking.
Well, obviously the big issue right now is mail ballots and turning the election over to the post office, the people who regularly deliver you your neighbor's mail. And we have data coming in from primaries, and it's not looking good, where ballots are being lost, ballots aren't being delivered, voter lists are outdated, so they're being mailed to people who don't live there anymore or aren't even alive. And perhaps worst of all, the ballots are coming back and being rejected. They're being rejected for defects, and the voter doesn't even know that their vote didn't count when they could have voted in person. And we're getting data from around the country from primaries showing that this is what mail balloting is all about, is disaster.
And if I remember our last conversation on this subject, it's in the millions of ballots that are getting rejected. Wasn't it just the California primary?
Well, California is one, but look at Nevada. Nevada is the worst case, where just Clark County alone, which is Las Vegas, sent out 1.3 million ballots, 200,000 plus bounced as undeliverable. So this is the voter roll, and 200,000 are bad addresses.
Wow.
310,000 came back. 310,000 were returned. That's out of 1.3 million. And of those 310,000, 7,000 were rejected for defects. So you're down to 300,000 basically being counted out of 1.3 million that were mailed out. What about all those other ballots out there? It's just like scattershot, throwing ballots out into the public at addresses that are bad in a broken postal system. It's not the way to run an election.
Now, I think it's 9 states now have announced. New Jersey, I guess, just at the end of last week announced that they were going to do a mass mailing to everyone on their voter rolls. And there are states that have done this for years, but they go through and purge their voter rolls. These are states that have never gone in. Marilyn Monroe may be getting a ballot in California. We don't know.
Well, first of all, I never use the word purge, because that's what the left wants to call it. That's the term they cooked up. Purge is what Stalin used to do to his disloyal generals. It's also what you do after you eat bad fish. So it is a violent term that the left has developed to represent the more correct term of doing list maintenance. You're cleaning up the voter rolls. You're doing list maintenance on the voter rolls. That's actually the term that the federal law uses, is list maintenance. And so, yes, the states that have not done list maintenance on their voter rolls are mailing out ballots to bad places. That's what happened in Michigan. That's what happened in Nevada. 200,000 were mailed to bad places because they hadn't done list maintenance for a long time. You mentioned New Jersey. If you ever need an example of how mail balloting doesn't work, look at the election in Paterson, New Jersey this year.
Oh, yeah.
You had activists. One was arrested by the name of Yaya Mendez, who was going from mailbox to mailbox taking ballots and voting them in the name of the voter. Yaya Mendez pled guilty to doing this. This is not some sort of urban myth that we dreamed up. This is a real live criminal. Then you have pictures from Patterson with some mailboxes with 20, 30, 40 ballots in it, because that's how many people were registered at that address.
It's amazing. So the list maintenance, and I believe it was the McDonnell administration tried to do list maintenance here in Virginia, and we have over time chronicled tens of thousands of people that are either on the rolls in Virginia and other states or multiple other states.
Well, Virginia used to be good. They've now gone bad because they've had radicalized administration of elections where it's crazy stuff. They're knocking citizens off the rolls as non-citizens, which they shouldn't be doing. They're not cleaning up the rolls. They're not doing a variety of things that need to be done to make sure the system will work. But, hey, that's what happens when you elect people like they elect in Virginia. You get bad results.
When we talk about this kind of propensity, and it can be very real, where people just order up a bunch of ballots, people get registered at multiple addresses. Immediately, folks of left-leaning persuasion will immediately talk about poll taxes and vote suppression and start using all of the scary imagery of the 40s and segregationism, which, by the way, were all part of their political ideology at the time. But, why am I to point fingers? What is the counter for, our listeners who, if they're at a barbecue and somebody says, oh, you're just for voter suppression, is it the ballot canceling of some invalid voter voting and canceling out the vote of a valid resident? How do we counter this rhetoric?
Well, tell you what I do. I offer somebody $500 on the spot. I'll give you a $500 gift card. If you can go in all the federal laws related to civil rights and elections and find the words voter suppression. It's a made-up term that the left has invented to blend together the legal and the illegal. It's designed to smear people who support legal things and smear people so it looks like they support illegal Jim Crow-style things. It is a fake term. It doesn't exist in the law. There is no law against voter suppression in the code. It is a made-up term that is part of the rhetoric of fighting things like voter ID. They use the term voter suppression to describe voter ID, for example, so you think it's like Jim Crow. So you think it's like pre-1965 Mississippi. It's a fake term, and that's the first thing I do is I offer somebody $500 if they can find any law in the federal code that mentions, quote, voter suppression, unquote. It doesn't exist.
Wow, that's a great way to do it. We hear poll tax, and that's another one of those scare tactics here in Virginia. When we first brought up the idea of IDs at election sites, photo IDs. Oh, that's a poll tax on the poor. And I said, well, and of course you point out that the poor, if they're getting SNAP benefits or WIC or anything of that, have to show photo ID to get those. So apparently that's okay. They have to show photo ID to enroll their kids in public school. I mean, these are all things that are perfectly okay to have photo ID for, but not voting, Chris?
Right, and they'll say, well, voting is not a constitutional right like getting food stamps are. But the reality is marriage is a constitutional right, and you have to show photo ID to get married. So is getting a gun. Buying a gun is a constitutional right, but you also have to show ID for that. So, look, there's a reason they don't like photo ID. It's not because they can't get it, because it's free, it's easy, and if you can't do it, most states have a hardship affidavit. The reason they don't like it is because they're afraid that people that will vote the way they want them to will forget their ID or lose it. That's all it is. They just don't have the guts to say what they really think, unless they're behind closed doors, where I've heard them say that when I was at the Justice Department, Civil Rights Division. But that's really what's going on with opposition to photo ID.
J. Christian Adams, president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, is on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio with us. Chris, we were talking about the ballot and the access to it, one of the things Virginia, again, elections having consequences, is same-day voter registration. How is that going to work in this world where, at some point Governor Northam may announce that we're going to do the same thing New Jersey and some of these other states are doing with mail-in ballots? How is because you start adding some of these things together, and I don't know how even the most legitimate and righteous of governing structures can keep up with all the possible ways fraud could be taking place.
Well, that would be a real eye-opener. Pardon, if Governor Northam unilaterally declared same-day registration in Virginia because it's against the law. But, these days, what does it matter? Who cares if you put on a KKK suit and blackface? Who cares? Hey, that's just how it goes. Excuse bad behavior. You want to issue edicts and executive orders that break the law. Hey, what? This guy can get away with anything. So maybe we'll be seeing that. I don't know what to tell you.
So this is just one eddy and current in the whole civil rights debate, as it's going forward, Chris. And you wrote a column in the Washington Examiner about racial spoils, and we've talked about race profiteers on this program and on my local program before as well. These riots that we're watching going on across Virginia, Richmond, Roanoke, as well as nationwide, it's really about 3 or 4 dozen people trying to get power where none existed before, over thousands of people who are risking quite serious charges and arrests.
Well, that's exactly right. This is what you're seeing on the streets is the culmination of many years of racialist thinking that your guilt or innocence for anything is determined by your ideological outlook. It's a Marxist concept. It's, show me the man, I'll tell you the crime. It's the idea that if you think the right way, if you have the correct political ideas, then by golly, take your mask off and go protest in the street with 500 other people against edicts that you aren't allowed to have large gatherings. Because after all, they think the right way, and we therefore excuse their non-adherence to COVID-19 emergency orders. Mm-hmm. But if they pick up some Molotov cocktails, like 2 lawyers did, who were thankfully prosecuted under federal law in New York City, but not state laws. After all, there's nothing criminal happening in Portland where drivers are being pulled out of cars and beaten against the pavement by their head, like we saw last night. You can't find any crimes there, say the Portland DA. It's all a function of show me the man, I'll show you the crime. And if the man is in favor of Black Lives Matter, if the man is in favor of marching in the streets and attacking a federal courthouse, and there's no crime to be seen. But by golly, if it's a conservative, well, that's a different matter. You stand out on your front porch after a mob breaks down the door to your private gate to the private community, and you have a firearm, like the couple in St. Louis, then that's a crime, and you will be prosecuted as swiftly as possible. Folks, that is Marxism. Read Gulag Archipelago. Alexander Solzhenitsyn spends a great deal of time describing this phenomena. It is an ancient one. It's not new to America. This was a phenomenon that goes back at least to 1917, but that's what's happening in America now.
Well, one would argue that the collapse of a direct democracy goes back to even the Grecian and Mediterranean democracies, the first attempts at it, because one of the reasons we put together a Republican style of government based on democratic principles, not a pure democracy, is you see this kind of rioting, you see this kind of insistence on governing for self-interest rather than governing for right and wrong, which bankrupts so many countries through the history of mankind, Chris.
Well, that's right. And so for the last 250 years or so, 240 years, America has been largely immune from this contagion. And unfortunately, the left has brought it to our shores. They've imported it. Maybe, we can talk forever about how, but they brought it to our shores and popularized it via social media, where if you share beliefs different from the mob, you're subject to attack. If you want to speak up on campus, you must be expelled. There's all sorts of retribution for people that don't adhere to the left-wing mob's orthodoxy, and they're trying to either have that retribution occur in the streets or in the law, and both of those possibilities are frightening.
Well, our process was designed to protect the minority, ironically, and it's being turned on its head, even in abstract during the Democratic primaries when I think it was Pete Buttigieg and it might have been Andrew Yang as well, talked about democratic capitalism, where we would all vote on the kind of businesses we would have in our towns. And we see sort of a soft core version of this through our licensing procedures in Virginia and our land use dictates as well, Chris. But we're headlong going into a place where if you want to own a business, I mean, you look at it in Virginia where the governor's just arbitrarily determined what businesses, what jobs are essential or not, but it's just another step before we've normalized ourselves into the place where before somebody can open a store of some sort, we all vote to determine whether he should be allowed to or not.
Well, right, and good gracious, try to open a business in a place like Alexandria, Virginia, and you've got another thing coming, so it's just a bad scene. It's really shocking, actually. Virginia was the cradle of constitutional thought. It was the origin of the Leedstown resolutions, or the Leedstown resolves in the 1760s that really got the party started. That really got America thinking about the possibilities of liberty. And so to have it happen in Virginia makes it particularly unfortunate.
J. Christian Adams, last ones for you. You were appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Give us a feel for through and around the slings and arrows and the tweets and everything else. Does the president and does the president's administration, Mick Mulvaney, et cetera, do they get where we're being dragged here and why, for future popularity or not, they need to stand in the way of where we're being taken?
Well, right, they do and I will tell you, to some extent it's belated. I think the president always got it, but for the first year or two in the administration, there were a lot of people, who were probably had more loyalty to George Bush than they did to the president now, to President Trump. And I think they were sort of, those folks they don't have good distant early warning about what the left is up to. But I will tell you, since the impeachment, the president has taken steps to bring into the administration the people who understand what is happening. And I'm relieved. Whether or not that's early enough, time will tell.
Well, that's heartening news, and if anything, something for our listeners to walk away from this program and say, okay, something is afoot in Washington, but in Richmond, and as we go forward, these elections are all going to have consequences, and a lot of what we're seeing in Virginia as well as nationally are because elections do have consequences, and sitting them out just because somebody isn't your perfect candidate is one part of it, but the other part of it is even engaging, and I know this isn't necessarily your purview, but when kids are, being indoctrinated in schools, and then you look around trying to find a conservative on a school board to tell a school superintendent that curriculum is inappropriate, I think over the last 10 years or so, we've really become fixated as conservatives on running for Congress and running for Senate and running for the State House, and it's very hard to get a conservative to run for school board or supervisor or council. And I try to bail against that tide, but we need more people at that level, especially where the schools are putting together curriculum so the kids will at least get the civics that they need to understand what their civil rights are, really.
Well, school boards in Virginia, some of them gone completely crazy. I'll give you a good example. Fairfax County. Fairfax County School Board is dramatically more to the left than Fairfax Council. In other words, they're both elected roughly from the same structure, the same body politic, but for some reason the school board is way more radical than the council. Mm-hmm. And why is that? It's because the people, not only do they not run for school board, they don't even vote for school board. School board is a election that people frequently don't go out and vote for.
Right.
And the proof is in the pudding. Just look at Fairfax County.
Well, yeah, and when you say all I have to do is get 50% of 20%, and you start doing the math, and why these protest mobs can take over. But I think part of it is this character assassination or reputation assassination on people like the president. Saying is the implication that don't be like J. Christian Adams or Joe Thomas, because we'll ruin your reputation, we'll wreck your business, we'll make your life, your wife and your children's lives miserable as well. It's that soft thuggery of high expectation that seems to come in this riot culture these days, Chris. And that's why I think we need to prop up and show the bravery of people who say not just no, but hell no in these cases.
Well, right. The problem is that it's there's only so much you can do, and each person should find a small slice that is suitable to their circumstance in life, and not get too upset that they can't flip a switch and change everything. You just have to find your talent.
Well, I like the way you put that. Just find that slice in your world that you can do something about. Thank you so much again. Publicinterestlegal.org. Please help them do what they do. Continuing. Chris, thank you so much again for your visit this week, and we deeply appreciate it, and thanks for the hopeful words.
Take care. Thank you.
Coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, we continue the discussion about the rioting in U.S. cities with Zach Smith, legal fellow with the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio.